Welcome to Sharing Her Story Unapologetically Ambitious with me, Christina. This is fun. Welcome back, y'all, to my podcast, Sharing Her Story Unapologetically Ambitious. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Jennifer Valli. Before we get to hear from her, I'm just going to recap a little bit of what we talked about last week. We heard from Angela Nixon. She's a mama of four, very successful business founder of Craft Cookie Co. She got on here just to encourage us to take those big ambitious steps outside of our comfort zone and to really go after what we believe in. Today, Dr. Jennifer Valli brings her knowledge. My hope for today is to encourage you all through her message of strength and passion and guidance. Dr. Jennifer Valli, you are a seasoned psychotherapist drawing on 30 years of clinical experience. You're a licensed therapist here in Tennessee, but you are also nationally certified as a sex therapist through the American Association of Sexual Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. We're just so glad that you're here. Do you mind if I jump right into the questions?
Sure, I'm happy to be here.
Great. Awesome. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what led you down this career path.
I'm a mother of three boys, and they're now big people. But at the time, they were getting to be bigger, and the youngest one was in fifth grade, and I felt like I could be doing more than what I was doing. I felt like I was kind of ready to be working more. And so I ended up looking into different certifications, and I found a really great program. I came back to my husband and said, all right, this is a little crazy, but what do you think of this? He asked me if I was going to get my PhD, which at the time I said no. I'm like, I don't know. This is not a PhD program. And he said, okay, you should do it. There were certain things I didn't want to go back and do because I've been a lifetime therapist. You have to be a therapist first in order to go get this extra certification. I found a good program and I went towards the good program.
For today's topic of embracing sexual joy, can you just explain to us a little bit about what sexual joy is and why it's important for our well-being?
It's interesting because I don't usually use the word sexual joy. We do focus a lot on, in sex therapy, focus on pleasure, right? Pleasure versus performance. A lot of times people focus on performance-based sex, and that can get in our way, which we can talk about a little later. Mm-hmm. It's very connected to health, and I think that people need to recognize there's a lot of studies that show that orgasms relieve pain, they improve sleep, mm-hmm. they reduce stress, they help prostate cancer, they help menstrual cramps, boosts our immune systems and helps our lifespan increase, and even the cognitive functioning for older people if they were engaged in any kind of sexual activity, so including solo sex. In the past year, they had higher levels of cognitive functioning. It's really, I think, important for us to remember it's very connected to our health. We get such negative information a lot of times. We get fear-based education that can make it hard for us to remember that it's healthy.
Yes, that leads us into the next question. How do societal norms or the messages about sex influence our understanding of pleasure and sexual joy?
Right. I think we start with hearing that something may be negative coming from family of origin. It can come from society. It can come from different religious spaces. It can be pretty negative because people are trying to protect us. And then they basically use fear-based education to say, let's look at pictures of awful STIs, sexually transmitted infections, talk about you getting pregnant. Let's talk about very negative-based instead of pleasure-based. We very rarely hear pleasure when we're hearing sex education as we grow up. We have in society just generally that it's okay for men to be sexual, to have desire, and we don't really think that directly for women, right? I think actually for females, we grow up and really they are supposed to be the gatekeepers of sex. They're supposed to be the ones that are saying no. And then at some point, suddenly you see females advertising beer and cars in bathing suits. And so they're supposed to be very sexual at that point. As we get older, nobody's supposed to be sexual. Although I think there's actually been some recent movies that show older women being sexual, but a lot of times they are skinny white women, and that leaves a lot of other people out of being able to even envision themselves as a sexual person.
You've already talked about some of the common myths or misunderstandings that we have about sex, and how can we unlearn those?
Can we talk about that actually?
Of course. Great.
Okay. I would say some myths. There are two of them, women and sex drive, sex desire for women. And the other one is orgasm. If we look at orgasm numbers, only 25 to 30% of women orgasm reliably from penetrative sex. That impacts everybody because women are going around thinking they're dysfunctional and something's wrong with them. And then their partners are thinking maybe there's something wrong with them because they're not able to please the partner, last long enough. Maybe they're not large enough in terms of penis size. We all go around thinking there's something wrong because women are not orgasming during penetrative sex. Right now, the current thought is that the women that are orgasming during penetrative sex, it has more to do with the distance between the urethral opening and the clitoris. Women's orgasms most likely come from the clitoris, and if it's close enough during penetrative sex, it gets stimulated enough, they might be more likely. If it's, that shorter distance, they might be more likely to orgasm. A big myth, right? And especially if you see TV in the movies, everybody's orgasming at the same time. It goes back to ancient Greece, where they thought that if we orgasmed at the same time, we'd be more likely to have babies, right? We'd be more likely to conceive babies. We really have some incorrect thoughts. And there is what we call an orgasm gap between heterosexual couples, with the man orgasming and the woman not. It's not because the man doesn't care. It's because this information is not out there. What you're doing right now is great because it impacts everybody from not feeling shame. I think all of this goes back to shame. Yes. We fill in the blanks with not knowing to shame, right? It's like something's wrong with us or something's wrong with us as a couple. The idea that everybody's having more sex than we are is very common. The other thing has to do with female sexual response. When we start in a relationship, generally people are pretty sexed up. That's not a technical word, but basically testosterone's higher. We've got dopamine. There's all these different things that are elevated. It's just easier. At that point, we start with what they call spontaneous desire. That desire at the beginning of an interaction. Everybody's ready to rip each other's clothes off. Not that they necessarily do that sometimes, but they have that desire where they can feel that thoughts and fantasy, and it feels great just in your mind, right? That's at the beginning of an interaction. But what happens as what we think of for women in long-term relationships, after about 2 years, maybe 3, she thinks 2 to 3 years, Helen Fisher thinks that we shift into something that is called responsive desire. What that means is that rather than the woman feeling that desire, like I'm ready to rip somebody's clothes off right now, that after they've been married 2 years, if they put themselves in the situation with their partner, and it's the right kind of stimulation, they will likely get that desire in process. Let's just say we have Jane and Joe Memphis here in the studio, and he's like, "Would you want to be with me?" She's going to be thinking, "Not really. I'm not even thinking this." If she could say to herself, so for women, a lot of times it's more of a thought that is like, we haven't been together in a while. I have a neutral feeling. I don't feel anything. Jane thinks we haven't been together in a while. That's the thought. And then we need to get into the bedroom. And if we're in the bedroom and we start to interact, then maybe I feel something. Hey, wait a second. Actually, that feels good. Now maybe I can get my mind into it. That's the desire. Then maybe orgasm. And that depends, right? What kind of stimulation, if the person's comfortable with who they're with, right? There's a lot of things that play in there. There's a major myth in terms of us looking at women because, well, the truth is women a lot of times do look like they're going to rip somebody's clothes off at the beginning of the relationship or hookup. Right. So if we're watching a movie and it's the beginning, maybe that's more accurate. But we do see a lot of that. And then we leave thinking there's something wrong with us. There's something, why don't I have any desire? What's wrong with me? I never even think about it. Well, the truth is you should maybe get your hormones checked. But if that desire comes in process, you're probably normal. That's a big misunderstanding for women, and they carry a lot of shame around that.
Yes. I think it's great that you've pointed that out, that our lack of knowledge can turn into shame. And that's what you're here to say. Let me educate you more. Speaking of that, how does mindfulness play into enhancing sexual pleasure and intimacy?
Yes, I think mindfulness is big. So women have a lot of difficulty meant to tune in. So, like, to the right things. The right things would be that mindfulness to ground into your senses and really to think about what's going on and to opt into that space. What are you feeling? Versus what we are doing, which that Cindy Meston thinks about 70% of women are thinking about what they look like, that they look fat, that they need to have a big t-shirt on, they need the lights out, they're really not comfortable in that position because you might see my big rear end or something like this. Instead, they're thinking about shaming stuff. We do it to ourselves. And then Cash looked at that and found that actually impacts our orgasm rates. So body conscious women who are thinking, I look fat, their orgasm rate's 42%. When they are body confident women, right, 73% orgasm rate goes up in a big dramatic way. So it really even impacts that lack of mindfulness, lack of tuning into the right things, impacts how we experience sex, which is sad, you know.
How can we create that space and discuss these desires and boundaries, and also, hey, this is what I'm thinking, help me overcome this?
Okay, that's a good question. First of all, we want to know our bodies ourselves. It's very healthy, whether you're married or not married, to be able to know your body inside and out, know what works for you. Also knowing it's okay to fantasize. There's a difference between fantasy and behaviors. We know that women have better orgasm rates if they have the ability to fantasize. You want to be able to hear your partner and really focus on hearing rather than jumping in and having a plan. Because there's a difference between fantasy and behaviors. Somebody might be sharing their fantasy with the person. That doesn't necessarily mean that they want to do these things. One partner is saying, this is what I was thinking about, and then the other partner can't stop talking about this other scenario. The person's like, oh gosh, I'm just trying to help you understand. So really focusing on hearing your partner. If they're saying this, really do more listening, less jumping to conclusions. Add it in slowly. If you are maybe not interacting that much, if somebody's not interacting that much, they can start by maybe even with clothes on, having t-shirt and shorts and just start getting comfortable. First, they might talk about what is ideal initiation. What does that look like for you? Let me share what that looks like for me. Again, it doesn't mean the other person's going to do that. And then what would happen is then maybe they would start to alternate initiation for real, and they would provide non-genital touch. This is just like a back rub. Maybe they're providing a foot massage, hand massage, really focusing on what does it feel like to feel pleasure and to be in this space together. Sticking to whatever the boundaries are, because you mentioned boundaries, whatever they spoke about earlier. Say, this is our plan for tonight. And then they could gradually add things in. But they always want to start with the least anxiety producing thing first. If somebody's got anxious about something, they don't add that in. Maybe they add that in later, or they don't add it in at all. It can be hard. Compromise with this topic can be hard because people feel resentful that they're not getting what they want. And then people can also feel guilty. They're not giving what they know the other person wants. And it's hard to sometimes know where you're able to speak up and where this is actually compromise. It's not that you're a victim, you're compromising instead. And also, I would say things don't have to be the same in one night. Like if one partner provides a certain type of stimulation, doesn't mean the other one has to get the same thing, right?
Speaking on those hard things, how can past traumas and negative experiences impact the relationship with pleasure?
I want somebody to go get therapy for their trauma first. And really go to a trauma therapist, right, that specializes in that. Maybe they do EMDR. You don't want to be adding all this in. I would want them to do that first. Then we would talk about what that looks like.
Yes.
I think sometimes what happens with us, though, is somebody might have a history of trauma. Jane Memphis is here. and she has that responsive desire, she might go back and think, okay, what are these things that are standing in my way? And, I don't really understand why I'm not orgasming and I never have desire. And it
Mm-hmm.
must be because I had this past sexual trauma. Right. And so it's like, well, are you thinking about the sexual trauma at the time or are you not? No, I really don't think about it, but that must be what it is. This is where I'm talking about that they really are pretty normal, right? They need to figure out how to own that responsive
Mm-hmm.
desire and keep it on their radar and initiate. What does that look like? But not fill in the blanks with, it must be because I had sexual trauma, or it must be because I'm older, or it must be because I went through menopause, it must be I have cancer. If I were going to say what is normal, right, that's a terrible word to use. It's probably closer to normal that a lot of women don't keep it on their radar after 2 to 3 years of a relationship, but they still can get these nights where they do have it on their mind and
Mm-hmm.
desires at the beginning. It means that sometimes that might happen, but most of the time it's sort of not on their radar, right? So what they need to do about it, if they wait
Right.
for her to initiate all the time and she's not even aware of this, they'll be waiting forever, right? Everybody's got to get the information.
What are some practical exercises you recommend to reset our sexual experiences?
Starting with taking all of this off the table, all of the sexual, the connection, and then going back to, let's just start over, and we're just
Mm-hmm.
providing, we're going to work on initiation and frequency, and we're doing
Okay.
that by initiating just a back rub, and then we're going to initiate, and then they're going to add, and they're building on that to
Mm-hmm.
not only include sensual things but more sexual things, and they're starting with the least anxiety producing thing first. That really
Okay.
helps somebody start over again and really understand, and it helps a lot of women work on initiation, because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how are we going to do this? If it's the least anxiety producing thing, maybe it's just a text that day. The other thing is, people can do like an eye mask. Eye mask, you're going to block out the light kind of eye
Mm-hmm.
mask. And one partner might, to work on trust. Let's say we have a person that's had sexual trauma, they really are thinking about it a lot. A big exercise for them would be, let's say Jane Memphis has the eye mask on and her partner takes, whatever around, like I'm just picking up a pen. Let's say Jane Memphis has on a tank top and panties. They take this pen and they run it very slowly up and down her arm, and then they go to the other arm and they run it up again and they get down the arm again. And then they take it and they go down to the legs and they just do it on the legs. And then they might switch out the item. Maybe partner of Jane says, let's get this scarf. So we're going to use a scarf and we're going to do that. And it's not a guessing game about what it is, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
more an ability to really tune in
Hmm.
into the moment and feel trust and safe and
Yes.
feel like, what is it like to be a good receiver? It's really knowing how to tune in and experience pleasure and use that mindfulness that you asked me about. You can't get playful unless there's trust. There's
Right.
trust and safety built in, which is why boundaries are important.
Once you have that trust established, how do you then incorporate playfulness into your sexual encounters?
Yeah, right. Probably didn't say that correctly, because trust safety should be ongoing. But
Yes.
yes, I know you know that, but I'm just
Yes.
saying it for everybody listening. Okay. There was somebody I saw yesterday. It was funny. They're using a book on making it interesting to initiate. This was funny. They were given in the book, they were given 5 names or something, or 4 names of apparently positions, and they were supposed to come up with the position just with the clothes on, right? Just having fun. And so one of them was flying windmill. I do remember that one. And I'm only imagining what that would look like. Some of it is dates, right? They're having these
Mm-hmm.
dates, and that builds the space between them. You definitely see a lot of people that really need to have that emotional connection to be able to engage. And actually, when you look at men and women, very different in terms of what was sexually satisfying. Men put orgasm and pleasing a partner at the top of the list, and women put
Hmm.
emotional connection, dialogue, emotional intimacy, and then orgasm is number 4. So it's
Oh, wow.
on the list, but it's not something that would define whether something's sexually satisfying or not. It's not the main thing.
That's a big discrepancy with men and women trying to find that balance.
A lot of times they feel more emotionally connected when they are sexually connecting. men. If you and I go to lunch and we feel really good, we talk to each other, we give each other a hug, we get all this emotional nice thing, right? Sometimes because of how men are socialized, they're exchanging information. It's fact-based.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the game. Let me tell you what happened here. This is what I need from you. They may have a lot of females in their life, but they don't go to that. This is the one thing that, partners that female partner could offer in a heterosexual relationship. This is a nice connecting space that only he gets with that person that he's partnered with.
As we get close to wrapping this up, how would you encourage the listeners to find a qualified sex therapist?
Well, ASECT, American Association Sexual Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. The counselors are medical people, and the educators could be anybody. And then the therapists have to, again, already be therapists, but then they've all gone for a boatload of education. You have to have so many hours of clinical contact. There's supervision hours. There's a whole lot that goes into it. But that is a nice group that you can just go on, and they have I think it's called Find a Professional. And when you go onto their website, it helps you do that. And you click Tennessee, and, you put your zip code in, and, actually now with the laws, you could see anybody in the state of Tennessee, their license, if they're also ASEC certified, their regular license would carry them through. It depends on what kind of provider they are. Sometimes the psychologists they can be in different states, so you could different ways, but that site would be where to start.
What advice would you give to listeners today who want to embrace their sexual joy, those of us that feel hesitant and not sure where to start?
I would start with podcasts like yours to be able to understand that really likely they haven't gotten a lot of healthy, when I say healthy, like sex positive information, understand if they're normal or not, which I want to just tell you, they're normal. They're normal.
I'm normal.
Yes, everybody's normal. And I have people cry in the office when I say, look, let me explain this female sexual response. You're normal. And there's immediate crying.
Yes, that's perfect. Yeah. That's what I want them to hear is this is hard, but there's education out there to realize that we are normal. Thank you so much, Dr. Valli, for
when people they want to Google sexual health rather than just sex. You can Google sex, but you'll find different results there. You Google sexual health and then maybe type in the word ASEC, you'll end up with more accurate information, not somebody that just likes to talk about the subject.
That's good. That's a good tip. Thank you so much for all this information, and it'll help us down our pleasure reset. Friends, it's you and me. Let's change the world. I know that's an ambitious idea, but let's do it together.